Hello there. So, I was going to talk about where have the children gone and elderly. So, we're going to go back in time now to when I was a child. And even when my children were still children. I remember on my estate where I grew up, every single street had children on it. And they were always outside playing, even in the rain. And when we were children, we would go to school, and then after school we'd just run and play out. I didn't do it as much as other children, but I just remember there'd always be the sounds of children playing outside, and it was just mayhem sometimes, especially in school holidays, because you'd have them all over the place and we'd hang around in groups. And then the dogs, they didn't have leads, they weren't vaccinated back then, they didn't have collars on, they were just feral like us. So dogs went round in gangs, children went round in gangs. And I remember on the estate where I grew up, we had housing for the elderly. But the elderly back then were very elderly, like in the 80s and 90s. And I remember them, and we had a place just for them, and we called it Death Row. And they were like flats, 2-storey flats. And we called it Death Row because the people went there and they didn't leave unless they died, basically. But communities used to be full of people, and you spent most of your time outside in summer. And I just remember that was just normal life. And yeah, we didn't have the technology back then, but we also didn't have the fear that we have now. So we lived in a neighbourhood that was really bad. I mean, it was good and bad. So I remember being really young, and there was always creeps about. So really, there was stranger danger, and they were our own neighbours. They lived in our own neighbourhood. But you could go home and say, oh, this happened and that happened, and it would just be like, yeah, or just stay away from them. But you never got locked in for it. And it was just normal part of life to us to have the rough and the smooth and the ugly and everything else. But we spent most of our childhoods outside, and the generations before us were the same. And then when my children were children, it became different. Something changed in that generation, and I was really overprotective of my children, and I'd say, I want you to play where I can see you. So I'd make them play out on the green near the house, and if they were somewhere else, I needed to know exactly who they was with and what they were doing, and I'd go and check on them, and I'd also play out with them. And then when I got my house with a big garden, I turned that into a playground and just said, summer holidays, we put the slides up and the swimming pools, and you play in the garden and bring your friends. But we was generally still kind of sociable then. But then this generation, I go back to visit my mum, and she lives on the same estate that I grew up on. And every single time I go there, I don't even see children. There's no children. They've gone. And we know where they are. They're inside playing on the games. So we've become like this technological age where the people just live on the internet. And that includes really young children as well. So you don't really see them anymore. And then the place where all the elderly used to live, the Death Row part, has all been demolished. So there's no very elderly living there anymore. And then down the main road in the valley that I lived was all masonettes. And they were always known as the over 50s. You couldn't get a masonette unless you was over 50 years old. Now they're full of young couples and single people and people with young families. And I'm like, so where's the elderly gone? And the funny thing is about where I come from, I definitely saw it in my generation, not so much, because I remember very elderly people. And then my children's generation, I remember the elderly being more like in the 70s. And then now you look at the Masonettes and they're all full of people my age and younger, and you're like, where's all old people gone? And you'll say, well, they're all in nursing homes, but is everybody in a nursing home, or are we just not living that long? And it's a very weird thing. And then we went through a phase, the last generation, where my children were growing up, where they started knocking all the houses down because they couldn't get anybody in there. And the schools, we used to have 3 schools, and that turned into 2 schools, and they merged 2 of the schools into 1 school. So now it's like 1 school but on 2 different sites. So obviously the generations have got lesser as well because they don't have as many children. Not in our culture. Other cultures still do. And I know we can be racist and go on about other cultures that are here, but they're living the way we did, and they're like multi-generationals living in one house together, and they generally have big families, which what we used to do. But we've become so hyper independent that we don't even live near our own families anymore. We've all spread out and separated, and things have changed. But it's just something you just notice. And when I came up here to Scotland, I hardly ever see children here on West Coast where I am. I hardly ever see children. And when I do, it's like a shock, like flipping heck. I remember children, but that's because this place here has got a high population of elderly, because there's a lot of second homes up here, and a lot of people have retired to this area from other places and bought houses here for the retirement. And the schools, they're all like low population. When I lived on the Isle of Ling, they threatened to close the school down because there were 7 children in the school. And island schools are notorious for having a few children now. But go back a couple of generations, there wasn't. They had a full quota of pupils because people had more children then. Things have changed so much, haven't they? Even in this last 2 generations, we've got to a point where it's like spot the married couple with the children, because we've become so separated and so diluted down. It's like the heart of where we came from has all fallen out. It's just very weird. And when I'm going around and I'm thinking, I go to places sometimes and I think this should be full of children. This is the sort of thing children would like. And there's hardly anyone there. And I'm thinking, flipping it, where have they all gone? But when I go back home, it's just a ghost town. You know, I remember you could go in the woods or on the reservoir or on the moors or on the streets, and there was always a little gang somewhere playing marbles and Kirby and playing on the bikes and playing 2 balls and all this sort of thing. And we all had his own little cliques and his little gangs here and there. And you could hear children laughing all the time. And now you're walking around and thinking, we just seem to have lost them. They seem to have gone missing. And the elderly, the very elderly, have gone missing as well. And the generation that I'm in now, I'm in my 50s, there'd have still been 2 generations above me in the past. Because I remember them being very old. And it's not me being young remembering people as old, because we always thought everybody was old when we was young. But I remember them having 80th birthdays and 90th birthdays. And I remember, in the church, there was a lot of, very elderly women, mostly women. But where are they all gone? Are we just putting them in nursing homes when they get to 70 years old, or are we just not living that long anymore? And the poor people, they're gone about housing crisis and shortages, but they knocked half the council houses down where I came from because nobody wanted them. But I just want to know what your views are on this, because we know that children have become more into the technology. But are we even having so many children? I mean, I've got 4 children of my own, and I always used to say with my sister, Between me and my sisters, there were like 9 children at the time. Was there? About 9 at the time. And we used to laugh and go, I wonder how many grandchildren we'll have. And we've all got one. And my children are in the 20s, 30s. Sorry. And I've got one grandchild. So is it just because we're just not having that many children anymore, and it was just dying out as a race? You know, they say that the Europeans, they're going to end up extinct at the rate we're going, because a lot of the younger generation now are choosing not to have children at all. They just don't want any, because they can't afford to bring them into the world, or they don't like the way the world is. And so it's becoming like a dying race to be like white British. I think we're just going to end up just losing ourselves. I mean, I honestly thought I would have something crazy like 10 grandchildren, and I've only got one, and he's 10. So you just don't know. But yeah, what are your thoughts on it? Where do you think the children have gone? Have they just not getting born anymore and we don't want them? Or are they all sat in on the games? And where's the elderly gone? You know, the nursing homes were always full when they were there, but we still had independent pensioners, and now they seem to just be going. And I'm talking about the poor here, not the middle class, because a lot of them up here have got their own money and housing. I'm talking about the poor people, like who lived in social housing and council flats and things like that. So yeah, what are your views on it? Where have they gone? Where's the children gone, and where's the elderly? And why have we got all our dogs on leads and collars and getting them vaccinated when they used to be wild and free? What's happened?